So I just got done watching Joe Biden's big boy press conference, and the bottom line is, I think it was short. What's going on, America? Kev from Kevin's Corner, where I try to make some sense out of nonsense. And yeah, I think it was shite. For one reason, right before the press conference, this happened.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
It's over. We are screwed.
There you have it. Now, off grip, that's not a good look. So the press conference, of course, was delayed, and I'm thinking that they probably had to go over some last-minute adjustments based on that gaffe, because you don't want to come out and do what you're calling a big boy press conference right after making that mistake when you know all eyes on you, doo-doo. And you have to have some type of excuse of why you made that mistake. So I'm pretty sure they went over some last minute preparations, and then of course the press conference started. Now, the first part of the press conference was of course Joe Biden pretty much doing a campaign speech.
America flag was revoked only once in there's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people.
We don't need to even go through it. So as you can see, that was nothing more than him reading off of a teleprompter, which really doesn't do any justification to the whole concern that he's not able to run the country. But now all of a sudden he comes out and he reads his teleprompter, he gets all of his talking points out, and he sets the stage for taking questions. Now, off grip, I have some concerns, so let's get into the questions, the question and answer part, because he got his big boy pants on, y'all. He done graduated from wearing diapers and Huggies now, so he's ready for the big show.
Danny Kemp, AFP.
Okay, right off grip, I got a problem with this. See, I'm thinking that anytime you have to have scripted people that you're going to call on, that you are not able to just go and say you. Or you. So there's some concerns I have off grip. Number one, who came up with this list and what determined who is going to be called on? Number two, why can't you just go and point to people randomly in the crowd? Now, I'm looking at a person that might have some cognitive issues that people are trying to cover up. They want this to be very controlled. You don't want any unexpected elements taking place that could throw him completely off. So it appears that by putting together this list, you're creating an already controlled environment that also should make anybody trying to scrutinize this more skeptical of how genuine this is, how organic it is. So he starts off talking about, they gave me a list, which I have a problem with. He's been doing this since he's been president, and every time people would hear this, they go, why is he telling everybody that he has a list? No other president comes out and say, I have a list. So I'm already giving them the Steve Austin eyebrow, the fact that he comes out talking about stuff. I got a list. So let's see what happens as he calls on these predetermined so-called reporters. Now, the key to finding out if he is being honest or not, or genuine or completely spontaneous, is how quickly he responds to these so-called spontaneous reporters, and also how prepared is he? Is he, really prepared that where immediately Joe just comes out with an answer that seems to be tailor-made to the question? So let's check out the first question after he gets done hacking up something.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, and the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. And officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing by leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following. Look, folks, this is well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time, and find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one, Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge, but what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look.
Now, with this exchange, this is the latest gaffe. I think that he didn't have enough time to prepare, but they also knew that he would have to address this. So when the guy asked him, he starts off with a nervous laugh, okay, as if, oh, that was stupid. I'm a downplay it, through laughing to make it appear that that was nothing. But then right after that, he goes into talking about the whole conference, not the gaffe, not the meat and potatoes of the question. He goes into, well, this is a great conference. And then he starts to pivot into something more broader. He goes into how the conference is great and all these other world leaders are looking at him and thanking him. So he gets off of that gaffe real quick. He's like, get me off of that gaffe. I don't want to sit on that gaffe too long, because that's the latest gaffe that if I was to already have pre-prepared answers to the questions that are about to be asked, that's the one that I didn't have time enough to make any adjustments or memorize what I was going to say or have a written answer for it. So he addresses it briefly, tries to downplay it, but he don't have a legitimate excuse of why he made that gaffe. So he quickly pivots into, oh, well, it was a great conference. All the other world leaders appreciate all of what I've done. So it's a tactic of, I'm not going to answer the question and justify why I did that or explain why I did that or own why I did that. What I'm going to do is just say, that was silly. No need to really address it. Look at all the other stuff. Look at all the other shiny things. So he didn't answer the question. And I think that he was not prepared to answer that one because it was so fresh. That's the one that probably made them say, let's hold up and try to get this guy to be able to address this obvious question up front. Now, he also says that I came right back. And then I said, well, no, that was Zelensky. Well, looking at the footage, it looked like he just walked off as if he was totally unaware that he made that gaffe. And I'm wondering if it wasn't until somebody on his team said, hey, look, you just made that mistake, did he try to recoup from that? And I didn't see it in the video. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But it looked like when he said it, he was totally unaware of the mistake he just made because he instantly walked off.
I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job.
What was that? Of course, she asked a question that we've been hearing in the mainstream media and out of certain people who saying he needs to step down because it appears that it is selfish. So it seems like that question was put in there to address a particular concern or narrative that we've been hearing in the news. It was just perfect. And he came in and said, oh, by the way, just in case you're wondering, I'm not trying to protect my own legacy. And he didn't dwell on explaining or going deep into the question or his answer. He immediately pivoted to all of the things he claims he's done, all of this stuff. But what I'm just going to briefly skim over as an explanation or an answer to that question is Bottom line, I'm not in for my own legacy. I'm in for the American people. Look at all the stuff that I've done. But she has a follow-up. Let's see what he does.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her.
Now, that answer seems to be just perfectly laid out for him. Kamala Harris have come under severe scrutiny and criticism as well. And a lot of people are asking, can she take the reins, or is she a DEI pick? I think right now they're trying to unify and see if they can salvage the whole campaign. So he just rattled that off real quick. First of all, she's done well on this. You think Joe Biden knows off the top of his head the things that Kamala Harris has done? Nobody knows. That's the whole point. Neither does she. Yeah, that man just said she's been great on this, she's been great on that. All we saw is her coming out just making statements or randomly talking about certain things, but actually producing something, actually being a part of getting something done that she could stand on and say, yeah, I accomplished this, and it wouldn't have happened except for me and what I did. This guy just kind of skims over it. He just skims over, oh, she's been great on this, she's been great on it, almost as if he already knew that question was coming. I'm a little concerned about the legitimacy of these reporters and if perhaps these questions were given to them so that Joe can be prepared to answer them, especially when you're calling on certain people off of a list.
Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
Now, these questions appear to be questions designed to put out fires, designed to give him an opportunity to address particular issues or concerns that either the public have or other Democrats have. They don't seem like they're just spontaneous. I mean, there's no follow-up. And plus, not only that, whenever you are taking questions like this, it also allows the person taking the questions to control the environment, meaning you can ask the question and Joe Biden can go ahead and filibuster or go off topic and go on a tangent, pivot. He can go ahead and divert the attention away from him. He can go ahead and go on a semi or a small rant about all of his accomplishments, basically a PR piece right there. Look what I've done, all the things I've accomplished, and look, and this and that. What happened without me? Forever, without a back and forth exchange from the media. Now, when Trump would go out and he would do press conferences, the media was hostile and they were able to have real live interactions and back and forth, questions. Even sometimes in the midst of him talking, they would be throwing out more questions and going, oh, what now? Actually, Mr. President, what he's allowed to do is let them read a question in its full. And then right after that, he could say whatever he wants, and he could take as much time as he wants, and they are not allowed to continue with, but that's not true, Mr. President, and you know what, but you said this at one point. It just seems like they're taking whatever answer he gives them and saying thank you and sitting down, which makes me feel like this is a very controlled press conference and not a real big boy conference.
The limits I've acknowledged I have.
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you look at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I have, I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events, some with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to just pace myself a little more, pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about.
So he ends with, that's what it's about. And nobody was able to follow up with that. Yeah, basically, all the excuses we've been hearing this whole time. I've been worked. My staff, they got all the stuff for me, and I should have did that, and this and this and that. And I'm not buying any of that stuff. Now, he was able to throw that out there without any follow-up or pushback because he's controlling the conference. He calls the people he wants to call on, and right after, he just says, okay, next person, and all they're given is the option to what? Sit down and say, thank you, Mr. President. I'm not buying it.
And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway, I'm sorry, Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, and the weaponry we're getting to him? I've gotten him more long-range capacity, as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is working. I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief.
Whoa, Commander-in-Chief. Oh, see now, whenever he has to expound upon an explanation or an answer where he's required to give details and a strategy, that's when you start seeing him break down. That's when you start seeing him ramble. That's when you see him start to take a long time to stop and think about, okay, what am I saying? All of these things. Now, it also looks as if he's focusing, like, I don't want to assume, but it looks like he's looking at a teleprompter or something, the way he's staring. I don't know if he's looking at the reporter or not, but nonetheless, that answer seemed very kind of like he was winging it. Like he was just trying to memorize some of the talking points that they went over based on the question that was asked by the handpicked reporter that might have just threw him a softball and say, well, here's the question y'all gave me to ask, so I'm going to ask it. And hopefully they prepared him enough to be able to wing his way or flub his way through it and give some type of answer. And even in the midst of that, he does make a gaffe. But his hesitation and his slow walking through that question right there makes me be concerned. Like, is this really him going off the top of his dome, or is he simply responding to questions that either he know was coming or that they assumed would be asked by reporters that are friendly and not too aggressive?
The chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people. And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to
Bad bad nights, sir? How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years?
Well, that's not very reassuring, talking about getting the job done. See, the question that many people have is who's getting the job done? First of all, the job that you're doing sucks. Of course, you are your biggest fan talking about all the things you've accomplished, all the things you've done. But if that was the case, then it would reflect in the polls. Your ratings, your poll numbers would be higher. People think that the way America is being ran right now sucks. So maybe you are just a star in your own head. But secondly, for this man to say, well, how I'm getting things done, and I'm saying, well, obviously people are concerned about who's really doing things. So just because stuff is happening doesn't mean you're getting it done. We need to see you getting it done. All of the rumors out there that, behind closed doors, you're smart, you're witty, you're handling it, you are doing all of this stuff in meetings. Now people are starting to leak and say that, no, you're not. You're not that clever. You're not as sharp as attack like the media and all of your Democrat buddies were saying. So then it begs the question, well, who's really getting stuff done? When you can't come out and expand or expound upon your accomplishments, you can't go into details. You don't take press conferences, spontaneous ones. You don't do any of those things, but yet you're telling us, I'm getting the thing, getting stuff done. We don't know if it's you or somebody else.
Who I got here?
Now that alone bothers me. Who we got here? Now, you would think if you're trying to put out any concerns, any fires about, oh, well, this guy, he's not able to go off the cuff. He's always putting out pre-scripted, questions, all of these things. If you're trying to douse any of those thoughts, being obvious about you calling on specific people, giving a list of these people by whomever, that right there alone causes suspicion. I'm saying, what in the world are you talking about? And he holds it up. Wait, let me see who I got here. You can't get more obvious that somebody gave you that list, and whoever gave you that list would not put somebody on that list that they thought could damage you. So now I have to question, is it really coming from them, or are these questions that was given to them to ask?
Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that Donald Trump may weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Especially that question. Whenever somebody comes out and gives a question that it appears to be able to directly allow him to attack Donald Trump on a particular issue, especially when at this moment in time, all of the controversy is surrounding him. But now it seems like a question to try to undermine Trump and his legitimacy on the world stage during this conference that's taking place, the NATO conference. And I'm saying, now this is very convenient. This person is pretending that everybody over there overseas are scared about Donald Trump and he's a threat. These are all things that the Democrats have been pushing. These are narratives. This is an easy answer for this guy. And it almost seems like this is a question designed to say, Trump's bad. Everybody in NATO here supports me. Y'all need to support me because everybody's scared of what Trump is going to do. This This question sounds like that. I'm going to be honest. This is a question that is a no-brainer. He can answer this one in his sleep because these are talking points that they've been saying all the time about Trump. Trump's dangerous. He's going to take us out of NATO and he's going to, allow Putin to run all over the place. These are questions that I'm saying, this seems like one just for you, Joe, to have your way.
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster. I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems to have an affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you from Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine, that that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong.
Well, did you expect anything else after that question right there? I mean, of course, Trump's dangerous, Putin's dangerous, Trump loves Putin, Trump loves dictators. That did not sound like a question that would put the pressure on Joe to whereas we can actually see whether he's able to be commander-in-chief. That sounded like a question to smear Donald Trump and make Biden look like the better choice.
David Sanger. Where's it?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do, what they're doing with Russia, in terms of accommodating, facilitating, they're getting access to additional, they're not supplying weapons themselves, they're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we cannot, we have to make it clear China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, and we've reestablished direct contact with China after that. Remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between she and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure that she understands there's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and as it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine.
Now, I'm going to end with that question for now. I'm sure I'll be touching on more of this at a later date. I just wanted to address a couple of these. But now he asked him about China. And anytime you have to expand and be very detailed, it appears that Joe starts to ramble on. And at the end of the response, you're asking yourself, what have we learned? So he goes into the whole rant of, well, you know, we got to encourage China not to do this. There's got to be shown there's some consequences if they do business with and China. And I'm thinking to myself, none of that is answering the question. You're not telling us how you really feel about China, how you're going to really hold China accountable. It sounds as if you're giving us a non-answer. You know, you're just going to talk about, China has to be more considerate, and they can't just stand in the way of this and that. But he ain't saying we're going to drop some sanctions on them. He's not saying, you know what, here's our strategy to deal with China. He gave us a whole bunch of random thoughts, for example, and you know what, and this and that. But none of it came together to paint a picture and a plan of what he was going to do, which makes me think, even if that was a scripted question, when he was given the question, keeping a whole bunch of thoughts and responses in his head to where he could articulate it in a form to where people could say, okay, from start to finish, now I see the story. He's not able to tell a story. He's jumping all around the place and throwing out little fragments like here's talking points, but they're not making sense. They're not coming together to paint the big picture or tell a story. So it only makes me more suspicious about his condition if he's not able to articulate it to where I'm able to walk away and say, oh, you know what he's going to do to China? It just sounds like a whole bunch of stuff. And at the end of the day, I don't know what we're going to do to stop China or how we're going to deter China. He just said, they got communications between and China needs to, they're somehow not going to benefit if they're not going to make money. I don't know. Which that's the whole point. We've been hearing this come out of Joe for years. And at the end of each time he comes out, without a teleprompter especially, but even with the teleprompter, oftentimes we walk away saying, I still don't know what I heard, and I still don't know what the message was. And God forbid he goes off script. It's all bad. So now the real test is going to be if he agrees to another debate. Because they asked him earlier, what if you have another bad night like that and this and that? And he blamed it on all these factors. I would hope moving forward, if he accepts Trump's challenge, he will get all the sleep he needs. He won't be jet lagged. I don't want no excuses. I don't want no cold. I don't want no the moon and the stars didn't line up. I don't want no Trump's mic was off and he was and Trump lied and the New York Times had came out and said that my poll numbers was all low and stuff. And then I just had a bad night. I don't want to hear none of that bull crap. So my conclusion with this press conference at first sight is it was a bunch of shite. Now God bless y'all. God bless America. Take care.